I'm Allie. Join me as I create this Mystic Rose SuperDuo Pendant, whether or not you're creating it in an 18mm or in a 14mm Rivoli size. You can change it up, but the supplies stay the same. Go ahead and look below the video in the description to get a link to all the supplies listed out in case you need them. Gather up your materials on your bead on it board and let's get ready to get started. So to begin, we have our 18mm Rivoli, and I have here a 14mm Rivoli that I used during the creation of this. So we're going to show you how many different units you need to create in order to do this. Along the back here, you can see some Hubble Stitch units. So the original units that we're going to build are 8 OC beads along with one of our super duos. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Work for the 14mm Rivoli. As we increase to an 18mm Rivoli, we are going to go in and do 10. So we're increasing the number of our Hubble Stitch units to 10 from 8. So if you want to do a 14mm, you're going to use 8. For our 18mm, we're going to use 10 of those. The reason that I have the pendant to the back is because we are going to start in the back and work our way toward the front. We have a size 10 English beading needle and along with some size 6 DragonThread. I have my 8 super duos and my 11s out here to start that back bezel. I really like using Hubble Stitch in order to create the bezel because it is very forgiving and easy that you don't need to have it exactly to fit. We're going to begin with 3 beads going onto our needle, and I have about 5 feet of thread and a stop bead at the bottom of that thread. So back up through bead number 1, going toward bead number 2. Pull that down next to your stop bead there. And then bead number 4 in each unit that we add is going to be one of our super duos in those crystal lab color. We're then going to sew down through bead number 2. Give a nice tight pull and that unit will come together. And you'll see that super duo sit right there in the middle. Our next unit is going to be the exact same. 1, 2, 3 8 OC beads. Once you have those 3 8 OC beads on your thread and needle, drop them down. So back up through bead number 1 toward bead number 2. Give a nice tight pull. And then once again, add a super duo and sew through bead number 2. So the stitch that we're doing, the Hubble Stitch, is kind of a combination of right angle weave and herringbone with our super duo sitting in the middle. We currently have 2 of those units. We're going to get to 10 units. If you're doing a 14mm Rivoli, stop at 8. After creating your 10 units or your 8 units, if you're doing the 14mm, you are going to make this Hubble Stitch go into a round. And we're going to connect the units to make it into a round shape. And then we're going to continue with some kind of right angle weave and a little bit of netting. So to begin, you are coming out the bottom of your 10th unit. And what you're going to do is connect to the first unit. So you can see naturally some of those super duos want to sit down to the bottom. We are going to force them all to sit towards the top as we work with this. But I'm not going to worry about that really right now because right now what we're doing is connecting unit number 1 to unit number 10. So as we fold that in to connect 1 to 10, we're coming out of bead number 2 from the last unit. What we're going to do is we are going to sew up through bead number 1, which is the bead next to the stop bead right before that super duo. We're going to sew through bead number 1, 2, and 3, circling back around then toward the top. So I'm sewing down here through, coming out bead number 2 on unit 10, making sure I'm not sewing through that stop bead, but sewing through bead number 1 of unit number 1. After you sew through bead number 1, sew through bead number 2, so I'm skipping over the super duo. And then I'm sewing through bead number 3, which is going to be the bead hanging out there along the bottom. Push that stop bead out of the way just so it's not part of your design. We're going to kind of push it to the back. And that's going to look then like a jumbled mess. but you've successfully connected your Hubble stitch into that round unit. See how those super duos are starting to all stick out? Here's where our size 11 seed beads come into play. We're going to use the 11s to link all of those Hubble stitch pieces right at the bottom. What this is going to do is keep those super duos to the outer edge, and we're going to connect the little bottoms or the feet there of, I usually call them a foosball player. We're going to connect the feet of our foosball player, that central bead, bead number 3 in all the Hubble units that hangs out at the bottom. We're currently coming out of the bottom of one of those, grab an 11-0 and sew into the next bottom unit. That's 1. Same thing, grabbing an 11-0 and sewing into the next unit, bottom. So you're going to do this 10 times. And then because it is the back of the design, what I want you to do is reinforce and go through all of those beads one more time. So you're going to have 2 passes of thread. First pass, we're adding our 11-0s between each of our Hubble stitch units, making sure we're going through that bottom 8 of each unit and pulling that in. And then our second pass around, just reinforcing by sewing through the 11 that you've already added and through the 8 to get 2 passes of thread into the back of this little bezel. Once you're done reinforcing your thread and sewing through 2 times, you can see how that 18mm Rivoli is going to sit in there nice and in the middle. So if you do want to downgrade to like a 12mm Rivoli or a 10mm, I would recommend going with mini duos because the super duos, it's going to get bunched up as we continue on. But anything bigger than a 14, stick with your super duos and just continue the pattern, adjusting the number of Hubble unit stitches. Coming out one of my 11-0 seed beads here, I'm going to sew into the next 8-0 seed bead, and we're going to step up to the super duo, going through the Hubble stitch unit. So I'm coming out of basically bead number 3 of this unit. I'm going to sew up bead number 1, and at the same time, I'm going to go through that first hole of the super duo, which is hole or bead number 4 from the original units. As you exit here, we're going to do a very, very simple task. Add 1, 2, and 3 11-0 seed beads, and then we're sewing into the next super duo. We're not sewing into hole number 2, we're just sewing into hole number 1. So the hole that we've already used on the super duos, adding 3 seed beads of your 11-0 seed beads and sewing into the next super duo. 3, next super duo. Once we complete this, then we're going to go in and we are going to create a netting that's going to come out through that middle bead of these grouping of 3 that we'll use to encapsulate. See that grouping of 3 there? We're going to come out the middle bead and create that netting to encapsulate our Rivoli. So go ahead and continue adding 3 beads around through the first hole, that interior hole of the super duo, connecting them all. As you finish up adding in your 3 seed beads here, you'll notice that I brought my thread and needle through the first 2 beads that we added in that group of 3 and out. This is going to be the way that we are going to add our netting that's going to hold in our Rivoli. The pattern that we're going to do is 2 15s, 1 8, 2 15s. Skip over top of the super duo and sew into that middle bead of the group of 3 seed beads that's next, 3 of those 11s. And that pulls that in towards the center. Again, 2 15s, 1 8, 2 15s, over to the next center bead of that group of 3, skipping over the super duo. Again, make sure that all of those netted pieces are going towards the top, that front. So you'll almost see that 2-dimensional shape starting to take place. Go ahead and repeat that so that way you have an 8 sitting parallel to every single super duo. Finishing up that netting, your project's almost going to look like a little doily. It's really pretty, as is too. And what we're going to do is go through that first 11-0 seed bead that your thread was coming out of, up through the first 2 15s and the first 8 of that first little peak that we've created. We're going to get ready now to drop in our Rivoli, and we're going to pull those 8s in towards the interior, which is going to create a bezel to hold in our crystal. That bezel is going to be connected with 15 OC beads as we pull in and really drive that towards the center. When your thread and needle is exiting that 8-0, you're going to add 3 seed beads connecting all the 8-0s. You can see I actually already went around and did that around the exterior. I'm adding in my last 3. And then I want to talk about the importance of going back around that bezel. If you are doing a 14, because of the circumference of it, it pulls it in a lot tighter. You're only going to need 2 of your 15s as you go around the circle. As you get a bigger bead, you may need 4 of those beads. But for me, for the 18, 3 is the lucky number. After going around like I did and adding them all in, just like we did along the back of the project, you want to make sure that you're going through all of those seed beads one more time. Not adding any in, just repeating the stitch, going through all of those 15s and 8s. Anytime you are doing a bezel or you're setting a stone that you are seed beading around, you always want to make sure to do a second set of thread going along that interior. That is the number one place where your thread is going to be challenged because it's pulled towards the interior. So as you're doing this, you want to make sure just to give it that extra little umph. It also helps to pull all the beads in and make them consistent along that interior. So you have a nice consistent line that's going right along the outside of your Rivoli or your cab. You can certainly do this also with a cabochon, and the pattern really isn't going to change. So go ahead and reinforce that outer edge, and then we're going to get ready to have some fun adding some beads to the sides. Finishing up on that center reinforcement, we're going to take our needle and thread, and we're going to head towards the exterior, coming out through that 11-0 seed bead. The 11-0 seed bead is going to give us an opportunity to connect on another level as well. So we've connected the 11-0 towards that netting to the front. We are going to connect the 11-0 now with some 15s and add some second row of super duos along the second hole of our first super duo. So the pattern that we're going to be doing is coming out here. We're going to add 1, 2, and 3, 1 and 2 15-0s, and then our super duo. So we're going to add 1, 2 15-0s. You're going to add a super duo, and then you're going to sew through the top hole of the super duo that's next in line. And that's just going to sit right along that interior line. Exiting them, we're going to do the reverse. Get out a couple more of my super duos here. And we're going to add a super duo followed by 2 15s. Go to that middle interior 11-0 seed bead. Again, like we've been doing, right there. And then sew through. Make sure as you're doing this that the super duos sit upright. They're going to want to bend a little bit, and we're going to correct that as we continue on. Adding in 2 15s and a super duo, sewing through the top hole of that empty super duo. Add another super duo, reversing the pattern, 2 15s, sew through that next 11-0 that sits in the middle of those original 3. As we go around then, you're going to do this and repeat this the whole way through your project to get your second row of super duos along that outer edge. So once you're done adding in your second layer of super duos as well as your 15-0s, we're going to utilize those 15-0s as a stepping stone to go up to the top of our second hole of our super duos. So I have my thread and needle currently coming out of the first 2 15s that I added. We're going to add a collection of 15, 11, 15, and then we're going to sew through the upper hole of the next super duo. In between the super duos, grab an 11-0 and sew from one super duo to the other, just filling in that space. Next side, 15, 11, 15, sewing down those 2 15s that are already there. Now, once you're down the 2 15s, what we're going to do is sew up through the next 2 15s, not through the 11, just skipping right away over to your 2/15s that sit prior to that first hole of the SuperDuo and bringing your needle up. After exiting those 2/15s, grab your 15, 11, 15 and sew through the upper hole of that SuperDuo. What this does is it gets those seed beads to lie nice and next to one another, almost linking them together in like a square stitch form. Grab an 11, sew through the next SuperDuo, upper hole, and continue on the whole way around this rose pendant. So as you're coming out of your 11O at the top of the design after going and looping around, you can see I've already done this step. I'm going to show you this step, but it's repeated those 10 times as we go around the actual piece. What we're doing is we are adding in 2/15s and an 11 that are going to sit in another almost Hubble stitch style and then connect and go through creating a point. So we're coming out of the 11O at the top of our seed beads there. And what I want you to grab is a 15, 11, 15 on your needle. Those 3 beads, we are going to connect to the other 11 that sits next to it. So on each side, remember we went in and we added those 11s with a 15 between each. I want you to sew down through the one that sits next to it. So you're coming out of the top of the 11 on the right between the SuperDuos. You're adding your 3 beads and you're sewing down through the left 11. And that makes it sit up straight. From here, we're going to go back through one more time, back up through the 11 that your thread was originally coming out of. And to make it sit as a point, see how it sits a little bit curved here? You can do the whole thing curved if you want, but we're going to point it out. Go through the 15 that you just added. Skip over the 11, taking your thread behind it, and go through the second 11. When you pull your thread, you want to take your needle and just raise your 11 up a tiny bit. Give a nice tight pull, and that immediately is going to create that nice little point. That point is created because we're pulling those 15s closer together, which is popping the 11 to the upper edge here. From here, we're repeating, coming down through the 11 that sits below, just like the herringbone or just like the Hubble stitch style. We're going to go up that 11 OCB that our thread was originally coming out of, and then we're sewing over to do the same thing along the next one, going through the next 15 sitting before the SuperDuo, the bead sitting between the SuperDuos, the next SuperDuo, the next 15, wiggling out, and then we're going to sew down through the 11, up through the 11, and add our little picot trim there. So you're doing that the whole way around the project to get those nice points, whether or not you're doing 8 of them or you're doing 10, depending on your Rivoli size. From here, we're going to go through and we are going to add our bail. Now, when it comes to adding bails to any of your seed bead projects, there are so many different options. The one I'm going to show is a suggestion, and then I want you to all show your Mystic Rose SuperDuo Pendant in our Facebook group for beading and jewelry making, and show me what kind of bail you put on yours. You may also notice that in this sample piece, I used 8 O's between the SuperDuos just because it was a little bit more open. In the piece that we used bigger, when we added more SuperDuos to do a bigger Rivoli, I just used an 11 OC bead between the SuperDuos to have that fit nicely. Those small modifications you'll be able to figure out as you're creating the pendant and just see what you have space for. So again, we went through and created this one here with 10 units and this one with 8 units as we're creating. So let's go through now and add our bail. Once you're done with all of your points, I want you to bring your thread and needle out between the SuperDuos, either out the 11 if you're doing the 18 millimeter or the 8 OC bead if you're using the 14. And when you're coming out the 11, put on your needle 4 15s and take your needle and thread back through that same 11 from the opposite side. So you're coming out on the right side. We're going to go back in to the left side, circling the thread around the top. From here, sew up through the 2 15s on the right side because they're naturally going to fall one side and the other side. So we're going to bring back up through the 2, see how it creates a little bit of a point there. And I want you to expand that with 2 more. So we're doing 1, 2 for the right, 2 for the left. We're going to sew down through those original first 2 on the left-hand side. And this is doing more of like a square stitch style. Going back then up the 4 now on the right-hand side. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So now you're going to end up with 4 seed beads on the left, 4 seed beads on the right. Much like we were doing as we went up and connected our sides of our seed beads and had them laying together. From here, we're going to increase and make it a little bit bigger. We're adding 1 11, 2 11s, an 8, and an 11. So you're going to add 1, 2 11s, 8, and 1 more of your 11s. That's one side. So we're going to do the same thing reverse to come down the other side. 1 11, 1 8, 2 11s. And then we're going to sew down through the second group of 2 that we added. So we're going to come out between the 2. So we're sewing down the 2 on the left-hand side of 15s. This is going to sit these beads right along the top here to be another portion of the bail. Getting back up to the top now, we're going to go over across to the right-hand side and go up the last 2 15s. And then once again up through the right-hand side. So we're going to go up through 2 11s, 1 8, 1 11, and let that sit for our bail. From here, we are going to come down through the back of the bail, and we're going to do a Y, a reversed Y shape, connecting back into the 11-0. That's going to create an area here for our chain or your beaded section to sit through. That way you can take the pendant on and off your design. For here, you want to go ahead and put on to your thread and needle a total of 9 11-0 seed beads. I'm going to pour out a couple more 11s. This is also a great way when you're making the bail for you to kind of clean up the area. So you're going to see my needle go off to the side. 1, 2, 3, 4, cleaning up my bead mat. 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 of my 11-0 seed beads. Coming down then to the bottom here, we're going to sew back into that 11-0 seed bead that sits between our super duos. That wraps to the back. Coming to the back here, we're going to pick up 2 more 11-0s, skip over the first 2 11s coming out of that, which were actually beads number 8 and 9, and you're going to sew back up through the other 7. Or sorry, 6, the other 6. And then catch on to that 7th one here, and then come down the opposite side of your pendant. So we went up the right, we came down, we did our little Y here, we came back up through, and then we're going to go down through the left-hand side. Prior to going down through the left-hand side, I want you to go down only beads number 1, 2, 3, and 4. 11, 8, and 2 11s. We're going to go back up through those same beads on the right-hand side. And once you're through those also, I want you to give just a little grab and make sure that your thread is tight. When you're at the top here, add in 1 more 8-0 and come back down that left side again. The 8-0 is just going to sit as a pretty little point at the top. If you have a crystal that matches your pendant, this is also a great place to add a crystal in there. From here now, we're going to just reinforce this bail. So to reinforce this bail, I want you to go down through the entire left-hand side, through the 11, up the entire right-hand side, flipping over to the back and go through the back again. After reinforcing, we are going to get our thread and needle to stay to the back and simply tie off the threads toward the back of the design. On this sample piece here, I have my thread knot. I can barely see it because it's green next to those green beads, and that will finish up our pendant. Once you go through and reinforce on that bail, you can see I just snaked my thread back through the super duos, back till I got to my center core of that Hubble stitch. I'm going to remove my stop bead from the project, take those 2 thread ends, because it's the back of the piece, which honestly is just as pretty. So it's really fun that both of these pieces are really great reversible also. If you happen to put it on incorrectly, chances are nobody will say anything to you. Pretty with both sides. I'm going to tie that nice and tight on the back 2 times. Grab my thread zap, thread burner, highly recommend if you don't have one, and go in. Do that close to the project, but not right against the project, because what I want to do with the thread zap or the thread burner is go in and make a blunt end. I'll show you here on the scrap. We're going to make this nice little blunt end there. See how it kind of builds up there into a little knot? That's going to prevent the knot from coming apart. So you want to leave a little bit extra on your project and then burn that down to create that little end on the project, which is going to prevent your knots from coming apart. And there you have your beautiful Mystic Rose pendant finished. Whether or not you do it in the 14 version or the 18 version, it's lots of fun. I'm going to attach mine to a piece of this fun long rectangle chain for a nice modern look. If you decide that you want to do it on a different chain, then simply take it off or make a little beaded variety to hang your pendant. As always, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you learned a lot about the different ways that you can change up a pattern for different size crystals or rivolis that you may be putting inside. Don't be afraid also to switch it out to a cabochon for a completely different look. If you ever need materials, go ahead and look below the video in the description. We'll put links there to get to our website so you can see all the materials that were used in detail with links. Don't forget, if you haven't yet, subscribe so you don't miss anything from us here at Potomac Beads. Thanks so much, Potomac Beaders, and stay tuned for our next inspirational design.